All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Citizen Bitcoin podcast. Still getting used to doing these live, but I'm having a lot of fun doing them. Last week we had Preston Pish. If you missed that one, you can find it here on this relatively new virginal YouTube channel. I still have to build it out and make it look good and fancy and do all the right things with thumbnails and all that. But hey, the content's good, and that's what matters. I'm here with Jesse Berger. How's it going, Jesse?
Sir, I am doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, man. I am glad that you came to join me today. We have a book to talk about. I understand that you have launched a new book. A wild new Bitcoin book has appeared, as you tweeted out on the scene. And I love this. I remember talking with Andy Edstrom back when he first launched his book. He had under 1,000 followers on Bitcoin Twitter, relatively unknown on the scene. And that was a fantastic discussion. And Andy has really taken off, become really well known, and just his book is fantastic. So I love the fact that we're sitting here talking relatively early. You're at I noticed under 1,000 followers, which needs to absolutely change. Anybody watching now, follow Jesse. I've read through his book. He knows what he's talking about. Definitely worth a follow. Welcome to the show, man. And let's hear first of all just a little bit about your background. Like, what have you been doing before you got into Bitcoin?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's great to be here. But yeah, my background, it's interesting. I always thought of my background as pretty bland, but when you add it up, it kind of works for what Bitcoin is. And I can explain what I mean by that. I studied economics and philosophy when I was an undergrad. I subsequently went to work in retail banking at Royal Bank in Toronto, which is one of Canada's big five banks. We only have 5 real banks here. From there, so not centralized at all. No, there's 5. It's not centralized at all. From there, went to a company called Macquarie Private Wealth, which was in Australia. They're a big bank in Australia, but they opened up a wealth management arm in Canada at the time. So that was back in 2011 for me. I worked there for 3 years, managing stock portfolios alongside a portfolio manager as an associate investment advisor. But I decided that I didn't want to manage people's money for a living. I learned the lesson while I was there that as much as investors will love you when you do well for them, they will hate you more than they ever loved you if you lose. Yeah. Right. And I happen to have worked with a very sort of high risk broker. So I saw both peaks and troughs and decided, okay, I don't want to do this. I didn't think I had, who was I to be managing someone else's entire, net worth basically. So that was not for me. I thought the industry, just the guys I was with, I wasn't happy necessarily. And so I left, needed to change directions, didn't know what I wanted to do, went to get my MBA. And that from there, I went into management consulting. I did some consulting for a bank in Canada for a few months before I ultimately went to a small company called Berger Group, where there was about 12 full-time employees. It was a small company, but they were a very high-performing company that they ran market research campaigns for very large companies. So I managed the entire market research program for one of Canada's large insurance companies, even more centralized. There's only 3 big insurance companies in Canada. So I managed their entire market research program for a couple of years. And I left, after sort of 2017 hit, had a good run in 2017, but my beginnings of understanding and learning about Bitcoin and sound money began way back when I first started working in retail banking. I was red-pilled on Austrian economics in 2007 in the wake of the global financial crisis. And, learning and thinking about sound money has sort of been at the forefront of my mind or the back burner of my mind for the last 13 years, just, depending on the different thing I was doing, whether I was thinking about it a little more or a little less. But in recent years, it's come back with a vengeance, and it's manifested in this book that I wrote.
That's amazing, man. So you have the background to, you've been in the belly of the beast. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I was on the front lines of financial services for a little while. And, you got to see some interesting things. and just learn, meet a few interesting people, have some interesting experiences. One of the things I didn't talk about in one or two of the other interviews I've done so far, and thank you again for having me again. I'm still getting warmed up. You were saying that I have
Yeah,
less
man,
than 1,000
it's all
followers.
good.
I'm just
Hey,
getting
I'm
started. I hope
easy.
here.
I'm easy. You get warmed up for the big guns. The Peter McCormicks and the Marty Bents and the Stefan Oliveras. I'm the warm up. I'm the the batting practice pitcher here.
Well, not to me. I'm still only a single A ball player here, right? I'm still trying to make it to the show. but but I was gonna say, for some reason I was thinking about this recently. I remember vividly working. So I was just a retail banker at Royal Bank. So if you needed to open a bank account or get a credit card or maybe do open a retirement savings account and invest in some mutual funds, like I was the guy for that. If you were investing more than call it $50,000 or $100,000, it's like Jesse, kick it up the chain to someone who knows what they're doing. So I was like very sort of frontline bread and butter. But I always remembered, or pardon me, I was thinking about this the other day, how when a client would come in and they'd have a check to deposit from, whether it's the federal government or the city, the rule was you just always clear the check. Like, it doesn't matter if there was cash in the account the money was supposedly coming from. Like, you just clear the check. And, there's this list that just goes on and on of bank accounts for the city and the country that are just in debt. They're negative balances. And it always blew my mind back then. I'm like, how does this work? How is it that they just have all these tabs open?
Right.
And so it was interesting to be exposed to that right as I was starting my career, right as I was starting to question, what is money? We just had this financial crisis. I saw the U.S. government magically come up with $600 billion to bail out the banks. Did they just have it in their back pocket? Like where did that come from? So that sort of helped complement, I would say, my journey.
Yeah. I mean, most people don't think about it though, right? And this is the thing. Like, most people will be like, okay, well, all right, they just apparently found that $3 trillion somewhere, and just don't understand where the money comes from. And I was that way, and I think most people are. It's just the way that money is managed now. It's been 5 decades, and that's it. The government controls the money. They can print it. And now we're at this point where it's just, openly accepted that the inevitable end in this form of MMT is just like, hey, deficits don't matter. Debt doesn't matter. Forget about it. Just forget about those numbers. They literally do not matter to the health of the economy. All that matters is inflation. And there is no inflation. Right? There's no inflation right now, according to our completely mangled and cherry-picked metric, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you can. If steak is getting too expensive, let's swap in a hot dog in the metric system, so that in the measuring system, so that now we still cover the protein, but you're just getting a much cheaper product as a substitute. This is okay. No, it's not.
Yeah. Sabatine talks about that. He's like, your ribeye in the CPI has turned into a soy burger.
Exactly.
But hey, it's just that means there's no inflation. You're still getting fed, right? I mean, it's still food, so we might as well just adjust it. So
I definitely sorry, you were I don't mean to interrupt you. You were saying before about how we don't often think about what money is, right? That's a question that not a lot of people ask themselves, because I think we've all grown up, our parents, our grandparents, the system was there and it seemed to work. There was no real reason to question it or be upset with it. And so for our generation, right, I mean, I think we're in a similar boat here. It was just expected. It was something you weren't supposed to think about. It just was the way it was. And, how to grow an economy, how business works, like, it just uses money. Money is a staple. Money is a given. And, obviously Bitcoin arrived on the scene and was here brought the message that, nope, don't take money for granted. You shouldn't be taking money for granted.
And thank God it's here. It's showing people what money really is, slowly but surely.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to, if you don't have the contrast, right? Like, you can look at Austrians, gold bugs, Ron Paul. I almost said Raoul Pal. Raoul Pal. Ron Paul. And have fought that good fight for a very long time. and made very little headway. They certainly educated a lot of people, and those people were, I think, fortunate to be educated by the Austrians, by Ron Paul, by the gold bugs, because they were, more apt, or more open to accepting the idea of Bitcoin, right? And that's, I think,
Yeah.
going to reward them handsomely over time. And that's great. I'm happy for all of them. But for the rest of us, the 99.9% who don't know what money really is, and that we're operating under this fiat system, which is really just a currency that's imposed upon us by force, and not a money. The store of value aspect of the U.S. dollar is gone a long time ago. So it's not really a money; it's a currency.
That's right.
We have a money. Yeah.
Yeah, and as Bitcoiners, we like to differentiate between money and currency, and it's a very important distinction, right? In my book, when I talk about currency and I try to sort of loosely define currency, I refer to it as a promise for some monetary good, for the actual thing that's valuable, the actual thing that's money. But obviously, 1971, right? We cut the tie to the gold window. The currency was the promise for gold back then. We severed that, and we've just sort of tried to make everyone forget about that, or they have tried to make everyone forget about that.
Yep.
And we just trade these paper promises that have, you can't redeem for anything. And that's a big problem, because money is, I was on I interviewed with a gentleman who's a student at my alma mater, at my MBA program the other day. He started a podcast because of the pandemic. He couldn't be networking with people, so he wanted to stay in touch with people. And I dropped this analogy that I said to him before. I'm like, this is a really silly analogy. It's a really stupidly simple one, but it might actually be effective. And the analogy was, is money something, or is money nothing? If someone can snap their fingers and just make money, it doesn't cost them anything. There's nothing that goes into it. Then maybe money is nothing. Like, why are we working so hard for this thing? Working so hard for it and then getting taxed on it.
Right.
Right. That we're working so hard for. We have this spare change left at the end of the day. We're busting our asses for it.
And the inflation.
And it's nothing. And inflation, right? And it's devalued all the time. So it's, but it's nothing to someone else, to the entities that create money. To them, it's nothing. But to you, as the person who's trying to earn it, it's everything. So do you want to earn money that is nothing, or do you want to earn like something real and tangible? And Bitcoin, tangible may not be the best word for Bitcoin, but it is created at a very real cost, and that's important.
Right. Yeah. So this is something I assume you learned. I'm going to put I have a question. I'm going to put a peg, and I want to dive back into the history of money, because I think it's a fascinating topic, and I know you studied it for your book, but this is also a great topic. We take a little rabbit hole tangent here. The necessity to use energy, right, or real world work in order to give even a digital or non-corporeal or non-physical asset or money value. Now, that's an idea that is hard to grasp at first. At least it was for me as a new Bitcoiner. And there's also the narrative of, hey, this uses a shit ton of energy. Why is that necessary, right? And so answering both questions, like, why is it necessary to expend energy in the real world to give this digital, money value, and why is it necessary at all when it's using all this excess energy? Like, can't we have money without burning all that energy?
Right. So, I mean, historically, right, a lot of people in Bitcoin talk about, Buckminster Fuller and Thomas Edison, and I think Henry Ford as well, who referenced, or who wanted at one point, a century ago, to create money from energy, because it's something that's sort of ubiquitous, where a unit of energy here is a unit of energy there. So it's the same, and it's also valuable no matter where you are as well. You can put it to use no matter where you are as well. So it has that value for you. You can put it to work for you. So that's, part of the reason that energy may or may not have been chosen by Satoshi as the thing that we consume or produce. But in terms of, being wasteful, initially, and when I say initially, for me, I'm talking 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was first. Actually, I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011, so that's longer than that ago now. But when mining sort of first started to make headlines for Bitcoin, it was all about mining's boiling the ocean. We're using energy. We're
Yeah.
consuming energy. We're consuming energy.
It's the same
And
amount
there's
of energy as Ireland, the entire country of Ireland. I remember that was
yeah,
2017.
yeah, and right now we use something like 0.3% of the world's energy to mine Bitcoin. But to identify that one data point and say, well, now Bitcoin's a problem. We need to turn off Bitcoin because it's just using energy and it's wasted. You're ignoring a few different facets if that's how you approach it. Number one, it scarce money, sound money. There's a social utility to sound money, obviously, for a lot of us. So that's number one. You're helping to secure this very important network. But number two, as guys like we were saying, Marty Bent or Steve Barbour in Canada, we have these companies now that are solving for things like gas flaring using Bitcoin mining. And what that does is it is able to drive energy efficiency. And so this is one of the things I learned while writing the book during part of my research was, I think I found this from Steve. He put out, I want to say it's from the World Economic Forum. I might be wrong about who put out this data point, but regardless, the world burns 145 billion cubic meters of natural gas into the environment every year. It's just burnt, wasted CO2 that we just emit into the atmosphere. It produces no electricity because we can't economically send it to the grid. So we have to get rid of it, so we burn it.
Yep.
If you were to plug a Bitcoin miner on site, it's very minimal infrastructure, right? You don't have to actually send the energy to the grid. You can consume it on site. And now what you're doing is you are adding more power to the Bitcoin network, which has its social utility as sound money. And B, you are reducing CO2 emissions. And then another part of that is the renewable energy argument, where apparently call it 3/4 of Bitcoin's energy comes from renewable sources, a lot of it located in China. But if you plug a Bitcoin miner into a renewable source, which again is maybe far away from where it might consume, it's not economical to send it to the grid, plug a Bitcoin miner onto that, all of a sudden you are now funding renewable energy sources. So to understand how Bitcoin is incentivizing the efficient use of energy is difficult to wrap your head around, and I still struggle a little bit with it, but it's a really fascinating development that seems to be coming up pretty quickly right now and making its mark.
Yeah, I mean, there are two costs, right? To Bitcoin mining, it's pretty simple. The business, the ledger, whether or not you're going to be profitable in Bitcoin mining, it's the cost of your energy and it's the cost of the machines themselves. Now, the machines themselves are it's hard. You're not going to find much of an advantage on the cost of the machines over your competitors, unless, some competitors might have like a special deal with, a mining producer or something, and they might get a little bit of a discount, whatever, but it's not going to be that much. The big advantage to be gained is on the energy cost. And so it creates a race to the bottom in terms of the energy cost. And so miners will go wherever it's cheapest, and where energy is being wasted is where it's cheapest. And you're getting it for zero, very cheap, zero, or sometimes even being paid to consume that energy.
The energy, like once energy is created, right, it sort of has to be used. Otherwise,
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just knocked out my earpod. It has to be used.
Yeah, it's got to be used.
It has to be used. So if it's an off hour, you can't send it around. No one's there to consume it. Again, by putting a Bitcoin miner with it, you can offset some of that waste and make it profitable.
Yep.
Or at least more economical, even if it's not profitable necessarily. Yeah.
So that's the energy side of thing. Have you thought much about the reason that, like, how using energy in the real world gives this digital asset value? Like, it's required to give the digital asset value, and just juxtapose it against and compare it to the alternative, the other plan, the other idea, of using of a consensus algorithm, consensus system without using energy, proof of stake, or similar ideas. Like, you wrote a book about Bitcoin, you've become a Bitcoiner. I assume you looked at like these other alternative ideas, right? So like, why, in your opinion, or how did you come? What did you come to understand in terms of why we need to actually expend energy in the physical world in order to achieve consensus and provide security?
Yeah. So for me, I think it comes down to money being costly. That be a quality of money. And again, it's sort of, is money something? Is money nothing? Can we create it for free? With something like proof of stake, they've been, if we're talking about Ethereum, or it can be whatever, it doesn't matter. But um, with staking, those that already have money now can earn more money from doing absolutely nothing, right? Just from sitting on it. In Bitcoin, that's not the case. If you want more Bitcoin, you have to earn it, whether that is through mining, whether that is through purchasing it at a real world dollar value cost, or any currency cost, or providing some valuable service, valuable enough that someone's willing to part with Bitcoin for it, right? So money being costly is a very important quality. And I think, and so in my book, we talk a lot about scarcity, fungibility, meaning like that money is recognizable, portability. I'm losing my head right now, and I can't remember the other two off the top of my head. Scarcity, fungibility, portability, durability. And here, I'll cheat real quick, just to fungibility and divisibility, of course, divisibility. Those are sort of 5 traditional characteristics of money. And in my, earlier days, we talked about gold as being, inherently valuable. And when you call something inherently valuable, I think it misses the mark a little bit, because inherently valuable is very subjective, whereas something that is costly, you can establish a real basis, like a real world basis for value, because it was a cost to procure it, whether you're mining, whether you're earning it, whether you're purchasing it.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that for me differentiates from why Bitcoin can and should be more successful as money, and why staking, can lead to potentially some issues if we're talking about, it being money, where you're centralizing money with the rich, right? If you already have a big position, you're going to keep earning on that for doing absolutely nothing, just for sitting on it.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I've always thought about it as like a balance of an equation, right? Like, if you have work on one side, right? It's the easy versus hard money idea in Keynesian versus Austrian economics. Like, if you have easy money, it's easy to inflate away. It's easy to adjust the value of it, repeg it, debase it.
Yeah.
If you have hard money, that it's resistant to those things. And if you want your money to maintain value over time, then you've got to have it be hard, and that requires there to be work. And so, yeah, Bitcoin is pretty ingenious in that sense, that you can, take work from the physical world and transmute it into value in the digital realm. Just amazing and beautiful. So let's dive back into the history of money real quick, because this has been, this kind of pendulum between hard and easy money has been swinging back and forth for a long time. You can go way back in time. You can talk about like the gold standard that the Roman Empire was built upon, the denarius, which was kept relatively debased for quite a long time, until that you have some rulers that come in that can't resist, or there's they overextend themselves and there's into massive wars, and they have to fund it by debasing currencies, etc. All the way up through the United States, which was kind of revolting against a system that was unfairly taxing the colonies, and so they wanted to control their own money. And there was a debate, very thorough and very well thought out and very interesting debate about how to handle money at the beginning of the United States. And did you go back and look at or study any of these guys' like ideas, like Jefferson and Washington, Hamilton, on the way they thought and talked about money as the founding principle of this country, and then we can juxtapose it to where we are now.
Yeah, I would say, I'm somewhat familiar with it. I'm not gonna proclaim to know exactly what each and every one of the founding fathers thought on, how money should be handled. Obviously, they wanted gold and silver to be money for the same reasons that gold was successful as money when it was properly used as such.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point about the denarius and some of the other currencies of, a day gone by that have failed, when you have the ability to, whether it's debasing the metal content or inflating the paper supply, when you can debase, if the ability is there, then the temptation is there, and ultimately someone's going to fall for it. Someone's going to take it. But what makes Bitcoin so special, right, for us is that there is no ability to debase it. And so there's no temptation. Why would you even try? Because you can't. And that's something that makes Bitcoin very special for us. But yeah, the idea of gold sort of being inserted, gold and silver being inserted in, at the inception of the United States, was a very important, piece of its prosperity for a long time. And it's just sad that, to see how it's unfolded over the last 50 or so years. And beyond that, and going back, whether we're talking about 1933 or 1971, or, 1913, the different, big markers that, were sort of pivot points in American monetary history, and by effect, global monetary history. It's a shame what's happened. It's terrible how we don't understand the ramifications of these things, right? We have trouble as, the population understanding all the downstream effects of debasing and destroying the integrity or the credibility of money.
Yeah. The history is fraught with the pendulum swinging back and forth, and the, I guess, taking over of the power, the control of money from the banking institutions, or however, in whatever way possible. And a lot of times it comes down to crises, wars, for instance. So the United States was on a pretty solid gold standard, silver standard, until kind of a bimetal standard, until the Civil War. And the gold standard, silver standard was completely removed, and the government issued greenbacks, which were did not have a promise for redemption whatsoever. And then we had a gold standard again during what the Belle Epoque is called, like the last kind of 30 or 40 years of the 19th century going into the 20th century, and then of course Federal Reserve, right? And the idea is always that there are these periods of demand for money, and that whether they come out of crisis, some kind of business cycle crisis, or war, or social crisis, there's this demand for liquidity, this demand for money. And if you have a fixed supply asset that is acting as the money, then you have basically a seizing up of the system, and it causes this economic pain that can be remedied by printing some more money, or depegging or debasing this hard asset.
Right? Well, it's palatable to print more money, right? Like right. On the surface, it seems like injecting more money. Oh, there's a deficit of money. There can be a solution, but someone had talked about how money is something you can't run out of money. It's like inches. You can't run out of inches, right? It's a measuring stick. If there is a certain amount of money in the system, if there's economic crises, it's not that we need more money to solve it. It's that the resources are clearly misallocated. And if we're going to fix things, we need to readjust where we're allocating resources, and that can create the balance. And to do that, price signals need to function properly, right? We need to clearly identify where and what the demand is versus the supply, so that we can find that new equilibrium. But when we inject money, we confuse that mechanism, right?
Yep.
Because now you're changing the measuring stick.
Yep.
And so, as much as, yes, there's always, historically,
It's
understandably, that demand, oh, rain money down on us. That's not going to be the solution.
it's a really hard sell though, like you said,
It's a
right?
very hard sell.
Politically speaking, okay? So like we need to take our lumps right now and not borrow from our future and future generations under the assumption that we're going to recover and make all of that economic value back up, because we're going to be able to recover faster, sooner, better, and be that much further ahead. And so we can't sell that, right? I mean, any government, any type of government, you can't sell that, right? You could have a monarchy, you could have an autocracy. They have an incentive to print money to ease the pain in the short term.
Well, you just said it, yeah, to ease the pain and sort of appease the populace, right? If the natives are restless,
Yeah.
You're trying to appease them, but every time you do that, you're just causing more harm down the road. And like you said, it's to create that very long-term vision, that low time preference. It's extremely difficult, especially for just wide-scale population. And it's great that us Bitcoiners, we now have this tool that allows us to start looking that way. And it's our job basically to get more people on board to understand that if we want human prosperity for 1,000 years, you have to build the systems that will endure for that time. And the systems we have right now are not meant for that.
Right. So we have a system. Okay, society inevitably seems to fall into these fiat systems because, like you said, it's politically expedient. The cell that we should be thinking 7 generations ahead, unless it's an extremely deep set cultural ethic, like it has been in some cultures, right? That aren't necessarily as dependent on trade with like other populations, right? Because once you start, becoming dependent on trade with other populations, which is the foundation of civilization, is how humanity advances, how technology advances, technology develops. So I'm absolutely not like, we shouldn't be trading, but one of the downfalls or pitfalls of trading and then development of money is the centralized control of that money. And if we cannot find a way throughout history, and have not been able to find a way throughout history, to resist the co-opting of the money, and therefore the choosing the path, the short-term time preference, the short-term path to ease the pain in the short term, which, like we said, like any form of social organization that has some relatively advanced like trading or economy of some kind are going to choose to have the incentive anyway, to choose to print money, debase the money in the short term, and not think about the long term. So what we have now is something fundamentally different, right? We have something that cannot be debased, and has been proven to not be able to be debased over the past decade, almost 12 years now, since, a couple months until the Genesis block. It'll be 12 years that this network's been up and running. And the 21 million cap has not been changed. It can't be compromised. You can fork it and change it, but it's not going to be Bitcoin. What do you think?
It becomes a cheap knockoff when you fork it.
Yeah, it doesn't work, right? What do you think happens then? Let's say, okay, like right now we have a crisis going on, just like we did in 2008. We're still on the global U.S. dollar standard. We're therefore printing a bunch of money. What about the next crisis? Let's assume in a future crisis where we're on a Bitcoin standard, right? And more Bitcoin can't be created. How do you see that playing out without the tried and true sort of instinctual like recourse to go to debasing or printing more money?
Well, I don't know if I'd call it tried and true. Maybe we could
call it tried and true.
We could call it tried, but maybe not tried.
True. Thank you. Yes, absolutely true. Absolutely right.
It'll be very interesting to see how people react to that. Again, we're assuming right now that we're in a future, whether that's 5 years or 50 years, where we're generally on a Bitcoin standard. And now we're coming into an economic crisis, whether it's because of natural events or just some dramatic economic change that we're not thinking about. But what has to happen then is relatively straightforward, where the prices adapt. Things that were expensive may become cheap. Things that were cheap may become expensive. Yes, it's shocking. Yes, it's different, but it's the only way we can get back to prosperity again, where we identify where the gaps, where where there's excess and where there's, where there's a surplus and where there's a deficit, so that we can rebalance and find sort of economic equilibrium to get back on that sound footing. Accurate prices, they're the only signals that can get us back there quickly and efficiently, right? When we distort the signals, that's how we're blowing financial bubbles, right there. Right. So we need, and the only way to get accurate signals is to have that very consistent measuring tape for money. And Bitcoin, because of its absolute scarcity, we all believe is going to be that great, ideal measuring stick.
Yeah. So, I can see in the future when you have that crisis that people are going to be like, hey, and Keynesian scholars already blame many of the devastating effects of the Great Depression on being on the gold standard, right? It's everywhere. It's everywhere in the economic literature. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get pushed back on that all the time when I talk to friends of mine about Bitcoin and potentially being on a Bitcoin standard, and then be like, look, well, what do you do in a crisis? Look what happened in the Great Depression. You're just going to ruin everyone's lives for like 2 decades just so you can keep a fixed supply. But go for it, please.
I was just going to say, if you say, oh, there's a Great Depression, it's going to ruin everyone's lives. Well, you're discounting human ingenuity, right? You're discounting, the human spirit to, oh, there's problems. Well, if I happen to be someone who is either benefiting from that scenario, or I happen to have means because I tried to be responsible in my, my financial life, well, there's opportunity for me to help lift people up and provide value to people. And that's what gets us going again. But when we all sit back and say, well, the producers of the world aren't going to do it, let's all just rely on the state to do it because they control the purse strings, they don't exactly have a reputation of being efficient or effective. And I don't think they can be because they are distorting things, right? They're taking money out of the economy and using resources that otherwise productive people would have tried to use. Yeah,
absolutely. Go ahead. Finish up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think I was basically done with that. But people's reaction, it's going to be very curious. Sorry, I guess I'll keep going. It'll be, it will be very curious when we do have, because it is probably inevitable that there will be some, bad negative economic event if we ultimately get to that Bitcoin standard, how people react and how deeply that understanding of scarce money has taken hold, and then how people react to it, both in terms of the people who are have-nots and the people who have, and what they try to do to create balance for the world and to get back to that sort of economic equilibrium.
Yeah. The other governmental interventions that happened during the Great Depression, like burning of crops or like dumping of crops, right, to try to maintain a price. Like you have these people starving, but they're trying to impose this artificial price, lower price on food, and so they dump a bunch of it, a higher price for farmers to be able to make money. It's so
counterintuitive.
And just it is. This is why we need to have a money supply that is not, manipulable by humans, that is completely, run by code and machines, because we just can't, it can't help but we've got to do something. We've got to do something. We're going to do this, and this. And even if those desires, those plans, those ideas start out with well-intentioned, which I'm sure most of them do a lot of the time, especially in situations like that, we have to save ourselves from ourselves, because that instinct is actually wrong, right, in the long term.
Well, I think, if we're talking specifically about something like burning crops, I have a hard time seeing that as the individual decide, oh, I want to burn crops. It's more
Yeah,
like, oh, there was some instruction that we need to burn crops to keep the price up, right? I don't think any rational farmer would intentionally burn their crops. That Why would they burn the thing that they're trying to earn their livelihood from?
yeah, yeah.
That there's no sense for that.
It makes zero sense. Makes zero sense.
And that's the effect of fiat money, right? It not only does it distort prices, right? It starts to distort logic and clear thinking, and that's sort of this, second, third, fourth layer of effects of fiat money.
I love this quote that you have at the top of one of your chapters, and you pulled out some great quotes for the book. But this one seems applicable to the current discussion. The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design. By Hayek there.
Yeah, we're lucky to have, these guys to have come before us to give us those gems, right?
Right.
It's yeah. There's a whole economic lesson in that one quote.
Yep. It's essentially what we've been blabbing on about for the last 20 minutes, in about 15 words summed up. It's this conceit that humans can manage the economy better than the simple form or technology of money itself, right? Well, it's a simple idea, but it has magical effects.
There's two sides of the spectrum, right? There's the side where we try to push all the power into the central hands, and no individuals we're not taking responsibility for anything. They try to do everything. And because they cannot possibly have the complete information, the complete picture of everyone's unique scenario, they can't possibly solve things for as many people as possible. The other side is we try to empower as many people as possible to make their own decisions and be responsible for their actions. And when you bear the brunt of your decisions, you are more likely to act in a way that is going to be beneficial to yourself and others.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the election mess that's sort of happening right now is a little bit of an example of that, where we keep seeing this, power accumulating in central hands. Year after year, election after election, the office of the president gets a little bit more power, a little bit more power, a little bit more power. And every time that happens, we are disempowering the individuals who need that power most and who know what to do with it best, who have the most information about their scenario or their situation.
Yeah. I was talking on Swan Signal Live about this yesterday with Marty Bent and Alex Gladstein, and the idea of that we sort of have this natural evolution. Again, it's going back to this idea of the pendulum and just kind of natural changes through a history of phases, where you have this kind of revolution and a decentralization of power, a breaking down of those centralized authorities, right, in institutions. And you have this decentralization. So like in the case of the American Revolution, we really had a pretty limited federal government, and we had decentralized power to states and to counties and municipalities, and now that over time has just slowly increased more and more power to the federal government and taken more and more power away from the states through legislation and Supreme Court decisions, etc. And that just sort of seems like the natural course, natural evolution, right? And now we'll get to the point where we want to kind of rebel against these ossified, centralized institutions that become rigid, that have become,
ultimately they become too overbearing, right? They try to do too much. They push people into too many corners, and ultimately, you push someone into a corner, eventually they spring back and they can't, they've had enough and they need to push back on it. And so, ultimately that's what's likely to happen. And how it'll manifest in different ways, I'm sure. In terms of monetarily and socially, or economically and socially. And thank God we have an escape hatch. For the first time ever, right? For the first time ever, and it's not just you and I in North America. It's everyone everywhere. The whole world has the same opportunity of if you're feeling cornered, if you're feeling like, your government's closing in, well, you can take a degree of power away from them by taking their power of money over you away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. It is absolutely a gift that we have this technology. And I do also believe that the kind of revolution that we're staring at right now is not one of political or social that will not be accomplished through political or social unrest. Political means, whether peaceful or not, or social unrest. Although we're certainly going and are experiencing those things, but I see it as the kind of the cypherpunk vision of unstoppable technologies. Like you build some kind of magical, unstoppable technology, as your book is called, pulling on that beautiful meme from the early Reddit days, the magic internet money. That's the revolution, right? And that's what we have to follow. That's what's going to work. That's what's going to actually free us, is this unstoppable technology, and not an amendment or a Supreme Court decision or a certain president.
And Bitcoin's meme ability, may make this one of the most enjoyable revolutions you'll ever get to be a part of, right? The fact that there's an army of us out here playing sort of 4D chess.
Yeah.
It's different. It's different from anything the world's ever seen, but it's a very complicated thing to really wrap your head around, because it's not just money, it's not just technology, it's property rights and understanding the principles of freedom and why it matters, like why personal responsibility matters, why that's inseparable from freedom. Putting all the little pieces together to get this, to have that light bulb moment go off, where you have this vision of that hole and that thing, once you see it, that you can't unsee it. And there's you can't put the genie back in the bottle either. That can't happen, basically.
The idea's out. Even if something happens,
it's going to be a very different kind of revolution than any other we've ever had. And recently, listening to sort of everyone, it's so much fun listening to like everyone on Bitcoin Twitter and everyone on the podcast circuit talk about how this is the first time as well where global communication networks are still basically open and functioning, or mostly functioning. Obviously, there's little pockets. China, there's little pockets where there's problems, or blockades, but for the most part, we're all able to communicate with one another and reinforce each other's ideas and validate each other's ideas, and that's something that, again, is very different from what we've ever had in the past.
Yeah, it is. How did you get into Bitcoin, man? You mentioned that you found it in 2011. Yeah, and then you were working in banking and finance. So tell me the story.
I'll give you my own little origin story. So around the time I switched from retail banking to wealth management, which was in 2011, I remember hearing about Bitcoin through basically Max Kaiser, and a combination of Max Kaiser and Business Insider, I think, and probably Zero Hedge as well. And it was, call it trading at 50 cents, 25 cents, a buck. I saw it in this little range. And I remember going to a few friends when I was at Macquarie and going like, oh, should we maybe, put $500, $1,000, like we should maybe put a little money into this thing. Cause we, as my little group of friends there, we understood the monetary principle of, we liked gold as I was more of a gold bug, I guess, but understanding that, okay, sound money is an important thing. Bitcoin replicates that to a certain degree. Mining, there's this predetermined schedule for coins. I had no idea how the underpinnings of it all worked. I knew it consumed energy, so it didn't come for free. Right. And so I was like, oh, we should put a little money into this. And then, we all start looking it up for an hour or whatever, and we have no idea what we're doing. It's like, even if we tried to buy it, there's no exchanges, there's no easy on-ramps. And then even if we did manage to buy it, we don't know what a private key is. How would we store this private key? We were completely oblivious to it. So let it go. The opportunity passes, and then suddenly the price goes up, $5, $10, $30. And okay, I guess we missed the boat. And so turn our back on it, obviously see the headlines for the next bunch of years as it goes up and down and up and down. But basically, I didn't really pay strict attention to it in the years following that sort of 2011. I didn't follow it, following 2011. And then I think it was early 2016, Don Tapscott came out with the blockchain revolution. That was making its rounds here in Canada, and I'm sure in the US a little bit to some degree as well. So I started reading that. A buddy of mine was referring me to it. I'd check out Blockchain Revolution. This seems really interesting. So I started learning about blockchain, and then by dumb luck, bumped into an old friend. Oh, and I was working at Verde, so my most recent job that I left was working at Verde, and he's like, and I said, "Oh, hey Brian, long time no see. How's it going? What are you up to?" He's like, "Oh man, all Bitcoin, Ether, like Ether is the most valuable commodity in the world that nobody knows about." And I was like, "Oh, Brian, that's a pretty bold statement," but I started looking at it as, okay, I guess it's this like operating system for these decentralized apps. I guess it's kind of interesting. And so I started participating in Bitcoin, Ethereum from, as a financial market, right at the beginning of 2017. So just dumb luck with sort of my timing.
Yeah.
And basically from there, the next couple of years are just this evolution of my sound money roots all of a sudden come roaring back, me watching the shit show that ETH has sort of become.
Yeah.
And all these coins where, you're trying so hard to a certain extent to justify the valuations of these things, like,
yep.
Oh yeah, this decentralized Airbnb, this, decentralized that coin, like, and so that, it starts with that FOMO, the excitement, but then, that fades to the back and the sound money thing comes to the fore. And oh yeah, like we don't want a million monies. How will we calculate what each one is worth against each other? What's the basis?
Right.
This is all garbage. Let's just have one really, really good money. And then the social benefits of, if we're going to have, quote, decentralized apps, I mean, we don't even necessarily need some of them. If we just have decentralized money, we'll just have higher quality applications and higher quality businesses and higher quality outcomes that come as a result of this. So a lot of the decentral XYZ that's not money, oh yeah, it's useless. It's not really, you can't really justify it so well. Like I still have a hard time now that I'm like thinking, when I think about it, I'm like, what really is the value proposition of some of these things? Like, if you think about a computing coin, and I'm not saying Ethereum, I'm saying, I remember Gollum was a coin that I had bought in my
I remember
days.
Gollum, yeah, they were like a file system thing or something.
Yeah, it was like decentralized, like computer processing of whatever, some nonsense. And
sounded awesome.
It sounded great. It's like, oh yeah, you'll only be able to pay for our services in Gollum. And then at some point, it's like, well, they're also going to open it to accepting ETH. And it's like, well, if they're going to open it to accepting ETH, then what's the point of Gollum? Or now you can accept Bitcoin. I don't know if you can accept Bitcoin. I'm just saying, like, unless it is hard-coded and enforced by the protocol coin company itself that only this thing will be legally and technically accepted for its service, which you can't really enforce. Like, money is the only thing that can be enforced. It's useless. The value proposition is suspect.
Right.
And so basically left my job in 2018, knowing that, okay, I'd gone through the shitcoin casino. I knew where it was going. I saw the writing on the wall, and I knew that I needed to be involved in Bitcoin. And ultimately, it was a little while after I left my job that I decided to write the book.
So you were basically you were able to dedicate full time to writing the book?
So yeah, I had left my job. I had taken out, like, let's call it a year and a half of kind of runway money to, okay, I know I'm going to try to do something in Bitcoin. I have no idea what it is, but I know that, I have this background in money and investing. Yep. I have looked at the technology. I became a certified blockchain professional, not because I'm trying to impress any Bitcoiners, but because, the suits might be impressed by that. So, okay, so I got that little designation. And so I had this sort of mixed background, and it was all just kind of coming together. And at first I thought, okay, I'm going to try to put together something so I can explain Bitcoin a little bit more easily to, like, high net worth investors. I used to work in wealth management. I don't really want to manage money, but I guess I'll go back to that. I think people are going to want Bitcoin, so why not be the guy for that?
Right.
And as I started working on this project for explaining Bitcoin, basically it morphed into a book. A friend of mine suggested, hey, this is a weird project, but make it a book and you might have something here. And so as soon as I slept on it the night he told me, and then I woke up the next morning and I was like, oh yeah, of course this is a book. And once I had the idea of the book in mind, it was just
That's
off to the
it.
races for me. It was it. Yeah. Like once I decided, I was like, I'm gonna write. I'll tell you this. I told myself that I would write the impossible Bitcoin book. That's what I was telling myself. I was like, I'm going to condense as many difficult arguments as possible into this short, into these brief little segments. And not only am I going to make them concise, but I'm going to try my best to make them like really friendly and approachable so that if you're not familiar with Bitcoin, it doesn't seem intimidating. And so I employ a few different devices in terms of like the images and the quotes and things like that to just make it seem a little bit more alluring and not as daunting. And then again, sort of very meticulously stacking the arguments one behind the other so that they come in this order that you're slowly, melting away the facade of what you thought money is, this thing that was ingrained in you. And now you're slowly realizing what money can and probably should be.
Right.
And while I'm at it, I'm also going to take my hacks at blockchain. I'll take my hacks at crypto and shitcoins. I'll take my hacks at forks. I'll take those guys out and put my thoughts on those on paper so that we can dispel with those and move on with it. Because, it seems to me, and I quote Safety in the book because he was the first to really sort of point this out for me, like the number one best and most, commercially viable use case for blockchain is money. Yeah. And Bitcoin is sort of the perfect example of that. And so, okay, I tried to expand on that idea.
Perhaps the only,
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so let me explain that to the average person so that we can stop having conversations about, oh, let's use a blockchain to solve this, that, or the other. And then again, the shitcoin casino with the incentive mechanisms are suspect. They can be changed on you. They're not consistent. So the rules of the game aren't set in stone. Like, let's take those out, get rid of those. Forks, they're kind of cheap knockoffs. If they were proposing something that was going to be useful to Bitcoin, it would have been incorporated into Bitcoin, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We rejected it. We rejected some of the changes and they went their own way because we didn't think it was valuable. And lo and behold, time has proven that I think we made the right choice. And, Bitcoin has, I think, unquestionably at this point emerged as the king of that domain. And it's for anyone to even try to unseat it at this point would be foolish. You would have to come up with something completely different and new and just better on all fronts. And
which I don't think it's not possible, right? Because I mean, this is working, and it has all the qualities of ideal money. So like you can't come up with an idea that's better, like in terms of an ideal money. Like you can't come up with a money that is 100x better in terms of its ideal form.
Yeah, you can't replicate that sort of inception where there was nothing before it to set the precedent, right? It set its own precedent. Everything that's followed has been an imitation of that precedent.
Yeah, I like to say that you can only invent absolute scarcity once.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because if Bitcoin is replicable, it's valuable, that replication is valuable, then it's not scarce anymore. Because in the future, we can just create another one, and you have a form of inflation, which is the market choosing one money. It's first as a product, the fact that there's you just can't make a substantially better product than Bitcoin, and two, the market is chosen, and it's a network effect. And so Michael Saylor talks about how he made a bunch of money betting on networks that were worth $100 billion or more, where their competitors are worth 90% less than that, 10 billion, $20 billion the most, and they've effectively won. And so then you place your bet on that network, and you watch it grow because of Metcalfe's law, right? Which you talk about in your book. And that's why it's clear that Bitcoin has won at this point. It's been de-risked so much. There is no, I think, better point in Bitcoin's history to invest in it in terms of risk to reward. The risks have been so diminished over the past 12 years.
It almost seems crazy to think about it that way, but it's true, right? Like it had to go through these trials and tribulations to prove that it was battle hardened and resistant to, forces that would try to control it or manipulate it.
Yep.
And it's done that, and there's very large value in that.
Yep.
So yeah, even at $14,000, whatever the price is right now per coin, there is unimaginable upside, which is also something to think about. That's just a little bit mind blowing sometimes. But well, yeah, it's really the best risk to reward play that exists, period, right now. Like what else is out there?
And on top of that, it's available. It's accessible to basically anyone on the planet. Anyone with an internet connection and a mobile phone can buy some Bitcoin. Even without a mobile phone, you can find a way to buy some Bitcoin. It is the most accessible asymmetric opportunity in human history. Probably the most accessible and most asymmetric investment opportunity in human history. It's just a once in a millennium.
Yeah,
maybe
we'll be
a species event.
We'll be telling our grandkids about these early days when Bitcoin was still 5 figures.
Yeah.
And we saw this opportunity, and we tried to tell everyone we know, like, this is it. This is the opportunity. Like, there's no reason not to consider it and just have some exposure to this opportunity. It's once in a millennium. I don't even know how long. It's the discovery of gold, right? Like
5,000 plus 7,000 years ago or whatever, right? I mean, that hasn't been unseated as the best form of money available on the planet that we have arrived at over and over and over again, on a Schelling point through human history. 7,000 years, it's been gold. And now we have something that's 10x, 100x, 1,000x better than gold.
And it has this, this force field that just lures people in, and it's very sticky. It's very sticky.
Quit your job and write books about it.
Exactly. Like my future for a little while there was very unclear. I had no idea if I was going to be able to make it. But now I feel so good, about what's to come, because, writing the book was very much a learning experience as well. I had preconceived notions about Bitcoin. I had ideas about, the direction of the book and some of the topics I would cover, but to then explore them in sort of detail and try to really understand them as best I could, it really solidified my conviction in Bitcoin. Like going through that process proved immensely valuable to me, even if I haven't made much money selling books. It's been immensely valuable, which is like irrelevant, because I'm happy that I'm helping the few people that are interested in it so far. And yeah, just to have that conviction now, like, that was worth it. That was worth all the effort that I went through. And it was a lot. It was not an inconsiderable amount of effort.
No, writing a book is a really difficult thing. Just writing, an article of a few thousand words is a very daunting thing to do, let alone stringing together, dozens of them.
I am in awe of some of the writers that Bitcoin has. Yeah. Like we have some serious, intellectual titans in Bitcoin, and I was able to write this because some of these guys, they inspired the work that I did, right? Like some of the ideas they put out, the things like that, like it's amazing. It makes you feel so good to be a part of it, and to sort of feel optimistic for the future as a result of it.
Yep.
It's very, very special.
Gosh, I hear you, man. The sense of hope and optimism is such a wonderful aspect of Bitcoin, and it certainly has changed my perspective on the way our potential future and the path that we're on. What do you think happens, like everybody, every Bitcoiner with skin in the game has their moments of speculation, their fantasies of thought about how this all plays out. And Bitcoin is one of the reason that it works is that it has this fundamental incentive that plays on human self-interest. And so we, although we are convicted about the potential good for humanity, about the privacy and freedom and all of those things that Bitcoin can really help, I think, bring about in this world, or improve in this world. There's the money thing, the value. Like this is an asymmetric an opportunity, and if there's going to be, if we're right, a massive wealth transfer, and us early Bitcoiners are standing to benefit greatly from it. So we all have these moments where we're fancying how this is going to play out. How far can it go? How soon is it going to happen? What do you think? What are your thoughts when you're having these moments?
Again, I'll sort of fall back to, the research in the book and the deepening of the conviction, right? Bitcoin has this habit of forcing you to think further and further into the future and try to project further and further into the future. And so, yeah, in terms of like wealth accumulation, how much is one Bitcoin going to be worth? Obviously we all want to get to the point where it's not about what one Bitcoin is worth dollar wise. It's about what Bitcoin buys versus
Right.
land
Yep.
or gold or art or other, traditional assets or things that, people just human preference we find appealing for or useful. So just very curious to like get to that point. That's a generation more maybe away, probably maybe less. I don't know. At least a decade, but it'll be very interesting to see what the next, 5-ish years holds. How the transition of wealth manifests, not necessarily among Bitcoiners, because I think as a group we're pretty consistent. We're going to be, obviously people are going to sell little bits along the way because we're still in a mostly fiat denominated world, and you're probably going to pay for your house or your rent or your mortgage or whatever. But how we continue to hold and solidify our ideals and the knowledge that we'll continue to dig up and uncover, right? I said something about in the book about, Bitcoin has been sort of fanning the flames of monetary discourse. We're creating new knowledge in a sense of money that was previously not there because we had no basis to think about it. Now we have this new basis to think about how money can and should work. And so we've created this new knowledge base. So, what are the next big ideas that come out of Bitcoin?
I love it, man.
I'm super, super fascinated to see, because things come out of left field all the time, right? Like, I tried to come out of left field, a wild Bitcoin book emerges. And so like, what's another set of ideas that emerge as a result of all this?
There's so much potential, so much fertile ground in Bitcoin. The base layer is just the beginning. We're seeing innovation on top of it. Lightning is really promising and really come along. Really interesting addition to Lightning called Lightning Pool was just announced from Lightning Labs yesterday. Yeah, right. It's kind of the beginnings of finance on top of Bitcoin, establishing a decentralized, non-custodial yield curve for donating, not donating, but staking liquidity into the Lightning Network. These kinds of things are just going to keep happening. And, layer 3 is happening, RGB tokens, which we're seeing a product called Atomic Finance, which is being built on layer 3.
I know Tony from Atomic because we're both in Toronto. I met him a year and a half ago when I started working on the book before I decided it was going to be a book. I was telling him about this thing I was working on. I'm going to try to explain Bitcoin and make it friendly. So I actually, it's funny you mentioned Atomic Finance. I know him and Matt, and I've met the team a little bit. So
yeah, it's kind of the cutting edge, man. They're building on the third layer of Bitcoin right now.
It's great to see, and to them specifically, those guys are like 22, 23 years old. These are young guys who like they get it now. They really get it. And they're super talented. And that's one team in one office in one city. And we got teams like that all over the place doing crazy things, doing super interesting things.
Yep. It's amazing, man. It's really exciting. It's really bullish. I think you put together a really great book. I think it'll be a good contribution to the growing canon of Bitcoin literature. How can people get their hands on the book?
Yeah, for sure. So you can, first of all, you can go to Amazon. It's on Amazon, Magic Internet Money, a book about Bitcoin. I also have my website, www.magicbitcoinbook.com. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Jayberjay, Jayberjay.
Berger,
Jayberjay.
Magic Internet Money on Amazon. Add it to your collection, guys. I know a lot of you out there, you Bitcoiners, love putting together your shelf, the growing shelf of Bitcoin books on your in your library, your home library. I love to do the same thing. I'll be ordering a copy myself. Thanks to Jesse for shooting me over a PDF version so I could peruse the book before we had this conversation. But I, of course, will be buying my own copy to add to my personal library, which will be going into my chosen Bitcoin Citadel at some point in the future. I'm also gathering from issue 1, however many they print, the Citadel 21 stuff. So I'm keeping those in mint condition, going back to like my baseball card and comic collecting days. I know how this works. All right. These are rare, scarce commodities, and I'm going to keep them in mint condition. And, it's going to be fun in 50, 60, 100 years from now. We're going to have our little libraries in these isobaric chambers.
We'll be amazed at what some of these collectibles might go for. You already see it with, I think there's 2 or 3 copies of the original Times from Jan 03 that are out there.
Yeah. Right?
Or Jan 09, I mean, that are out January 3rd, 2009. So there's a couple of them that are out there, and those are worth a pretty penny.
Cassacious coins from back in the
coins,
day.
Exactly. So like Bitcoin, it's got its little collectible world, and those are going to be worthwhile to hold on to, I think. Plus, the Citadel magazine, just their art is wicked, right? Like they've put together some great material. I'll throw in one more little plug for the book. I've buried a lot of little Easter eggs, both on the cover and within the book. So nice. For instance, if you're not going to see it very well, but I got the actual inscription from the Genesis block coming out of the satellite.
Yeah, January 2009.
Yeah.
Banks on the verge of the...
Just what is money?
I love it, man. That is the question. That is the question.
As Robert so it's funny, when I heard Robert Breedlove first say the question, what is money, is the rabbit you chase down the rabbit hole. He connected the missing dot that, I've been ruminating on for over a decade. Like when he said it just that way, put me through a loop.
There you go, man.
It was amazing.
Breedlove has the propensity to do that.
Yeah, man, that guy every time he gets me, every time. I tweeted at him in, I forget if it was December or January, after reading Tyranny and the Time Scarcity of Money. After he printed that, I tweeted him, I'm like, I have to change like 3 chapters of my book because I was not correctly accounting for the factor of time as it relates to money. Like I mentioned low time preference, I talk a little bit about it, but like building things for the future, like that, this is like a real super long-term game planning with Bitcoin. Right. He clicked that idea for me. And I changed like 3 different chapters after I read that article. I was like, just upended everything, but it was great. Like I made a better product for it. So thank you, Robert Breedlove.
Shout out Robert, man. Rob has been putting out some fire stuff, and actually his latest piece, Swan, actually has started commissioning some work from him. So we're going to try to get, we're trying to get Rob to write 10-minute reads. All right, like a couple thousand words. Yeah, we got the first piece out of him at 19 minutes, which is a considerable feat. So hopefully we'll be seeing, some more digestible chunks of Robert's thoughts on a regular basis on the Swan blog. He's going to be working with us a little bit more closely over however long that we can make that happen. But it's been a lot of fun to get to know him a little bit better, and just the Zoom calls, the meetings behind the scenes, kind of getting things going. Like you set up like a 1 hour meeting to kind of get things organized, go through some ideas, try to get an outline put together, and like 3 hours later, you're just like, you're
jamming on Bitcoin, right?
We got to get back to work, man. Are we working? This is work, right? We can keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, Jesse, really appreciate it, man. This is a ton of fun. Go follow Jesse on Twitter. And just congratulations, man, on the book, and welcome to the Bitcoin scene, and the canon of Bitcoin literature.
Uh, Thank you so much, Brady. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun chatting with you today. Yeah, this was great. Well, I'm sure we'll do it again at some point. We'll keep in touch. All the best to you and everyone at Swan. Yeah.